All right, thank you very much for that great discussion. During the SFF, please explore our online city to check out exhibitors, partners, and sponsors. You can, of course, visit the Accenture Virtual Showcase for the latest insights on industry convergence and also information and transformation in a post-pandemic world. To find Accenture, go to Online City and then the Accenture event site. Also, the Mastercard Virtual Showcase houses a wealth of information and resources available to view and download. This covers a full spectrum of Mastercard's offerings, from securing smart payments to facilitating digital inclusion and everything in between. We're now going to refresh the broadcast channel. Viewers, refresh your browser window in order to continue streaming the event, and we will be back online with you in just a couple of minutes. Stay with us. And welcome back to the Singapore FinTech Festival 2020. If you can see this, it means you've successfully rejoined the content broadcast. And this marks the end of the economic summit of the FinTech Festival 2020. If you've been following us throughout most of the day, it was a pleasure to have you with us. Hope that you enjoyed the great content that we had and wonderful discussions. If you missed some of the key sessions, including our highlight fireside chat with Jane Fraser, the incoming Chief Executive Officer at Citi, you'll be able to access a recording of that session on the event website. Meanwhile, I'll see you again tomorrow and hand over to my co-host, Sharon Tong. Sharon, great to see you again.
Yes, as Asia wakes up, how's your night been?
It has been fantastic. We have had so many interesting conversations. That Jane Fraser conversation was really interesting with Sopnendu Mohati of the Chief FinTech Officer here. And the point that Jane was making about this architecture of the banks, of the traditional banks, the legacy architecture that she mentioned and how that has to change as we go forward. A very strong point that she made.
Great, that sounds good.
And how about your day coming up? You got a lot going on, don't
Well, highlight of the day, Bill Gates coming on.
Oh, that's going to be fantastic.
He'll be talking about scaling up financial inclusion. Because it's the infrastructure summit today, we are going to be, of course, talking about digital infrastructure, building that. We're going around to several countries to find out how they've done it, see if we could take a few pointers from there. And of course, we also have to cover insurance and insurtech as well. And also a quick look at cryptocurrencies, the future of digital payments.
What aren't you covering today?
Everything.
Lots going on. I hope you have a great day. I hope you all stay with Sharon as she brings you in the day today. And I'll see you all tomorrow.
And welcome to the Infrastructure Summit of Singapore FinTech Festival 2020. Today's focus addresses creating the infrastructure for a digital economy and society. We are currently in the Asia-Pacific zone of the day. Now, don't forget to also follow our Green Shoots channel, Hyper-Local channel, and the Global Satellite Event Partner sessions for more content throughout the day. Now, the highlight session in today's Asia-Pacific zone, as I just said, is the fireside chat with Bill Gates on scaling financial inclusion. Now, if you're just joining us today, this year's Singapore FinTech Festival is a global and distributed event. We are live online 24 hours a day. With content from more than 40 FinTech hubs around the world, you are now following the Global Common channel featuring high-level thought leaders and global policy makers. You can also choose to watch content on the Green Shoots channel, the Hyperlocal channel, and the Global Satellite Event Partners sessions for more content throughout the day. Or you can also browse content in the hyperlocal channels, which are curated by partners in the FinTech hubs, to help you navigate our 5-day round-the-clock content. We have 5 different summits that each address a different global channel. Now, yesterday we had the Economic Summit on global recovery from the pandemic. Today, we're covering the Infrastructure Summit on creating the infrastructure for a digital economy and society. Tomorrow is the Impact Summit, focusing on enhancing inclusion and sustainability. Thursday is going to be the Investors Summit, which looks at restoring investors' confidence. And finally, we wrap up with the Talent Summit on Friday on building skills for the future. Now, this year's Singapore FinTech Festival provides a rich and immersive experience combining physical and online access. So you can explore the online city throughout the event to network with other participants and exhibitions. Digital premium passes provide access to workshops, demos, the networking zone, private mentorship sessions, and of course, Deal Fridays, a special event for FinTech startups and investors. And if you're physically in one of the FinTech hubs, you may join one of the many curated offline events, of course, subject to respective safe distancing measures. Now, meanwhile, our global content includes aggregating curated sessions from Global Satellite Event Partners, or GSEP. Also, you may check out the Startup Program, which includes the FinTech Awards and Global FinTech Hackcelerator. and COVID-19 has accelerated the growth of digitalization. Across the next 3 sessions, we will see how digitalization is taking place in both the payments and infrastructure space. Now, in the payments space, as consumers and businesses in Asia Pacific shift from cash to digital payments, they are continuing to engage with each other in new ways, both offline and online. With the COVID-19 pandemic in full swing, many people are, of course, staying at home and doing their shopping through their mobile phones and computers. And as a result, e-commerce and cashless payments have seen growth and spread further across different markets. Now, we're seeing a rapidly evolving payment space. Features such as payments as a service, one-click payments, invisible payments, spread payments, and even payments subscription services all vie for market share in a landscape that has in recent years evolved away from traditional financial institutions as the sole providers of these services. Now, the first panel of the day will examine how 2020 has changed the nature of both domestic and cross-border payments and what to expect in the future. Joining us to moderate the panel is Zennon Kapron, Director of Kapronasia, a finance and technology market research and consulting firm. On the panel, first up, Kamal Quadir, Chief Executive Officer of bKash Limited. Now, bKash is a mobile financial service in Bangladesh, operating under the authority of Bangladesh Bank. Next, Anthony Thomas, chairman of e-wallet provider Momo. Now, Momo allows users to make cash transfers, pay bills, recharge mobile phone accounts, settle personal loans, and purchase services like airline and movie tickets. Next, co-founder and president of Airwallex, Lucy Liu. Airwallex has a simple goal: to simplify and enhance the lives of people and businesses by connecting them through smart cross-border payment technology. Finally, Ling, co-president of Asia Pacific at Mastercard. Let's now go over to Zennon and his panel to start off day 2 of the Singapore FinTech Festival.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I think a lot of those points that Sharon made were very applicable to what we're seeing today, effectively across the financial industry and for hundreds of millions, if not billions of people around the world. We're in a new normal, and potentially for all of us, whether we be consumers or businesses, one of the areas that we've seen the most impact is certainly on payments. And what was already a shift towards digitalization around the world has now been an exodus to digitalization as we move away from contactful payments to contactless payments, whether those be online or offline. I think one of the really good quotes from day 1 of the FinTech Festival yesterday was that yesterday's agenda got us to today, but what is the agenda that we need to get us to the future? So over the next 40 minutes, we want to take a look at what's happening specifically in the payment space. And as Sharon mentioned, we have a great panel lined up today to help walk us through kind of what we've experienced so far, the changes that we're seeing in the market, and what to expect going forward to the future, including how that affects things like financial inclusion and regulation. So to start us off today, I really just want to start from a very high level. And Ling, let me come to you first. I mean, with your role at Mastercard and Mastercard as a company, across the region, what are the changes that you've seen and the key drivers of digitalization, both pre-COVID and now during this COVID period?
Well, thank you, Zennon. It's great to be here, first of all. Great to be with all the distinguished speakers on the panel. It is a great question. So we clearly see a shift from offline to online to digital. And in fact, I would say many of the trends we're seeing right now are just the acceleration of the trends pre-COVID. What are the drivers for those changes? Several things come to my mind. Number one, I keep hearing the word infrastructure. That's indeed true. And I think when I think about infrastructure or technology in Asia, one of the things that's very interesting is, in fact, new technology has enabled many markets and economies in Asia to leapfrog sort of the gaps in our legacy infrastructure. Mobile leapfrogging landline is a great example of that. Another thing that's a major driver for digitization or cashless societies is really smart government policies. Here, South Korea is a great example, right? the government really encouraged all merchants to start to take electronic payments, and they use policy tools to make that happen. Now, believe it or not, in Asia, Japan, as a developed economy, is still 50% cash in terms of retail spend. And now Japan is on this cashless journey. So we're seeing things happening not just in developing countries, but in the developed world as well. I think the last thing I would mention in terms of a major driver is really one, innovation, but two, the consumer adoption of the innovation. Some of the companies represented on this panel are probably great examples of those innovation fintech examples. But I think the most important thing is, in the end, innovation has to solve real problems, remove real frictions, and those will be the reasons for consumers to adopt a new technology, new innovation. So those are the things that are happening. But then and again, I feel what we are seeing today is very much an acceleration of pre-COVID trends. Most of the offline transactions are indeed moving online. I think in the post-COVID normal world, maybe some of this will revert back, but I think some of the shift will actually stay. And then even in the offline world, we're very clearly seeing touchless behavior, right? I myself, as an example, when I'm in Singapore shopping with physical merchants, I don't want to touch anything. I want to do contactless. I want to scan a QR code. So that's a very clear trend.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's really interesting, your point around technology versus the pain points. Too often, I think technology blinds us in terms of what the problem we're trying to solve actually is. Kamal, I want to come to you. I mean, Ling Hai kind of pointed at the infrastructure and the technology in place. And bKash, Bangladesh, I mean, there's challenges there in terms of infrastructure and the technology being in place. I mean, what changes have you seen in the people that are using bKash, and how has the adoption, both the adoption and changes in habits of existing users, changed over the past 9 months?
Sure. I mean, I very much echo the sentiment we are discussing over here, that COVID has fundamentally accelerated the change that was already taking place. So when we look at the bKash story, it's the 10th years of operation we're right now. So I must say the policy over here was already quite advanced, that we were able to create a company like bKash. So we have right now around 50 million registered customer, and the way it works, each and every customer is a unique, verified NID-based customer. So that gives the foundational strength. So what I see that in last 10 years, what we have achieved is creating a basic foundation of people having accounts. Okay, and now lots of other things are getting built on one stack after another. For example, I mean, the initial case of this account, the first use case people had was sending money home. And then subsequently we saw airtime coming in, and then utility bill payment and the other payment behavior. So gradually it's turning into a platform that solves many of your financial challenges. And so, we in Bangladesh, it's regulated by central bank. So the regulation became the key, and this regulators have been quite engaged from the very beginning, and I think that created a good order and discipline in the market. Okay, and so if I see the fundamental the complementing role between the bank and the fintechs also has emerged in last 10 years quite positively. The banks are holding the cash, and the fintechs are providing the service. So what we are doing in the process, a very different kind of net has been created. So these 50 million customers who was outside of the banking channel earlier is now are part of the banking channel, and their cumulative value of the money they're transacting are kept in the banks and in treasury bills, so that way customers' fund is protected. At the same time, people are having the flexibility of this digital accounts. And I'm just to highlight a few points here. Scale is so important, because when you are creating an alternative of physical cash, So we have 250,000, so 250,000 retail points across the country. And Bangladesh is a country, just to give you set the context, is as big as Wisconsin, size-wise, and half the US population. So in a place like that, having 250,000 spots when you can convert your physical cash into digital money and digital money into physical cash gives you tremendous the momentum of people interacting and people not feeling uncomfortable that the moment I would need the cash, I may not be able to convert it. So that fear is gone by having a network like this. And on top of that, 25 banks are linked with us. So people who are graduating from a small fintech account to a bank account can also interact with the bank, and they can now have access to all kind of banking product. So if there is a specific saving product that a bank is offering that fintech can't, that is also in the hands of people's access. Also, of course, we are offering lending, capitalizing our data as well as the banking partners. So if I look at the last 10 years journey, it has been a great progress in terms of financial inclusion, and the governments also their goal of digitalizing the country has been complemented by service like us. And then, as I can say, it's a country of 170 million people. Out of 170 million people, when 50 million people are having unique bKash accounts, that gives you an idea that how much momentum we can generate with this platform. And the other point I want to make, you mentioned about infrastructure, is the way the telephone operators and fintech like us has worked. And telephone operators have done fantastic jobs in the last 20 years building infrastructure across the country. So initially, we with keeping financial inclusion in mind, we use their USSD network, and they get paid for the USSD network, a regulated price. So they're also happy with the network they lend, and also their airtime business has become very efficient because it's the channel cost of selling the airtime at retail points have dramatically gone down, because now people are buying the airtime using the wallets, and as the handset price is going down, it also is encouraging people gradually shifting from USSD to the apps we see across the world. And our partnership with Ant Financial and other the technology hubs are also giving us the sense of trends that where things are heading 10 years from now or 5 years from now. So I must say, these are the unique time for countries like Bangladesh that can leapfrog in certain areas, as the previous speaker was mentioning. And we are an example where these things are all brought together. Right policy, application of the right kind of technology, and the right kind of partners from across the world who can bring the best technology for this country, and that's the impact we're seeing right now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you brought up a number of really good points, especially around trust, cooperation, and regulation that we'll touch on a little bit later in the session as well. And just going back to consumer behavior, Anthony, I want to come to you. I mean, you have experience both in the Philippines and Vietnam. I mean, in terms of the usage of these payments, what's changed in the way that individuals and businesses are engaging? I mean, specifically with the Momo platform now. I mean, Kamal mentioned some of the different use cases in terms of paying bills, obviously, paying in store or shopping online, those sort of things. Where have you seen the changes in your customer base?
Sure. Thanks, Zennon. And, I'll also echo Ling Hai's early point on acceleration of pre-COVID trends. And Kamal's story, of course, is well known with bKash. We like to sort of compare notes from time to time. And Momo has a very similar set of use cases. I think, to your question, any change is really driven by a problem, and typically step changes happen when there's an acute problem or there is a solution which is so much superior to current alternatives. Because a lot of these solutions existed for consumers and businesses, but the problem wasn't acute enough for a large proportion of the population to shift. And I think that's where this year has been a little different. You're right, I moved from running bKash, the leading e-wallet in the Philippines, to Momo, which has a similar position in Vietnam. Both are, over the last similar to bKash, both are 10 plus year-old businesses, but in the last 5 years or so, it's been more digital and app first. So consumers primarily access us through the app. And that's where we saw large spikes in adoption in both businesses. In fact, pre-pandemic, both were growing very well. Post-pandemic, it was even faster. But I will say that the Philippines grew faster because the difference was the pain felt by citizens was so much more in the Philippines with varying degrees of lockdown. Vietnam, on the other hand, has had a sum total of 1,300 cases and 35 deaths, right? So one of the countries in the region that has really dealt with the pandemic so well that people don't feel that incremental pain as much. Of course, it plays on the consumer mindset, but they haven't felt, Vietnamese haven't felt the pain that's being felt in other parts of the region. And therefore, that is not necessarily a big accelerator for Vietnam. To your question on the use cases, the ones that grew were P2P, so transfers, money transfer was a huge leap. Online payments in apps, because we are directly connected to Google and Apple, for the App Store and the Play Store, e-commerce, games, even traditional mobile top-ups and utilities. Of course, there were use cases that didn't grow as much. One, we have a great OTA platform, but not a lot of international travel. But one thing that did come back is domestic travel, and come back strongly. In fact, we've had the highest domestic travel volumes that we've ever had, because it's generally considered safe in Vietnam. And then, of course, we had cinema. Cinema, even if there isn't a huge COVID impact here, people don't want to generally be in enclosed spaces. So we have seen a drop, though that's also coming back now as people kind of settle. And of course, in-person payments and credit, because we do have, we are used as a credit or financial services platform. We did see tightening, though we do feel that we have grown in share, but overall market sort of compression there.
That's really interesting, the point around the acute challenges, because I think it is, it's difficult to change habits. One example from here in Singapore is, Lucky Plaza, one of the main remittance venues in Singapore. And, pre-COVID, you would go and there would be queues outside of each of the agents. And then during the lockdown period, a lot of that shifted online. But then after the lockdown lightened up and people were able to get out a little bit more, the lines reappeared. So as much as things change, they do stay the same as well. And it's, I guess, until you hit that acute pain point that you can really shape some of the customer habits. Lucy, I want to come to you. Obviously, e-commerce is a huge part of the story domestically in many of the countries around. Speaking personally, we're ordering quite a bit online, and Singapore has picked up in e-commerce as well as China did, obviously, during the lockdown as well. Cross-border e-commerce and cross-border transactions. What changes has Airwallex seen over the past 6 months in cross-border transactions?
Yeah, so I think initially in Q1 when COVID first hit, there was a disruption in supply chains with a lot of e-commerce, especially cross-border sellers. So logistics, factories and all of the supply chain slowed down a fair bit. So for the first half of 2020, we saw a lot of slowdown. But quickly, I think as the pandemic got worse, cross-border e-commerce definitely saw a lot of acceleration. And I think, we talked a lot about, business transformations of offline businesses going online, but keeping in mind that actually a lot of the newer merchants and sellers for e-commerce and other industries are digital, what we call digital native. So they're actually online businesses that doesn't even have an offline presence. And we definitely saw a lot of people, I guess, shifting to this business model where they don't actually have an offline store, and all of their businesses are being operated online. And similarly, I think on the consumer space, if we talk about, Generation Z and like millennials, that takes up half of the population. And a lot of the consumers actually are not used to using cash anymore anyway. And, thinking about like a good portion of that are the people who are spending online these days. So I think, so in terms of both domestic and the cross-border, this year has definitely been very interesting. And I think a lot of those behavior will continue to, drive.
Australian consumer. What are the main differences that you're seeing in their behaviors right now?
So I actually travel a fair bit between Australia and China. So I think I stopped using cash in China maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So I actually don't carry it with me. But in Australia, I think maybe if you're thinking about 4 or 5 years ago, I probably still need a little bit of cash with me. Not a lot, but just in case some places don't take cars. But definitely, I think starting from 2 or 3 years ago, it's becoming a very contactless and cashless economy. But what is, I think, similar in both countries is, as on the business side, a lot of the what I think financial services for businesses are still offline and driven mostly by banks. So I think that's a space where there could be a lot more innovation because, businesses are looking for more transparency in terms of the service they receive. And they're also looking for, efficiency and cost, which is something that traditional banks sometimes can't solve. So this year, especially with our Visa card launch in Australia, we saw a lot of businesses being more digital and, because now there are more solutions in this space that is really helping businesses rather than just bringing offline, services online. We're actually creating newer products that is better suited for their business models.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Kamal, I want to come back to you. I mean, one of the things that Lucy pointed out, I mean, myself, having lived in China for a number of years, I was completely cashless when I left in 2018 as well. And those platforms that we associate with China, like Alipay and WeChat Pay for domestic payments anyways, are a key part of the financial inclusion story, as is bKash to a large extent for Bangladesh. What are the changes that you've seen in terms of people coming into the financial ecosystem in Bangladesh around the past few months, and how has kind of the low touch payments, digital payments impacted that?
Well, the interesting part of our journey and what we saw in the last 9 months is that the poorer people adopted bKash earlier than relatively richer people, because I'm talking about last 9 years of trend. And because the poor people did not have any other options and bKash was designed to serve their needs, they were the earlier adopter. So in a very simple way, you would see the maids in the house are using bKash, but the people who are paying the maids, they did not have a bKash account, okay, for a long, long time, because those people have many other alternatives, okay. But COVID has somewhat really changed that to some extent. I mean, the acceleration from low-income group to higher-income group was happening gradually, but that we felt happened a bit faster. So even the well-off, the wealthier, or the relatively less financially constrained community, okay, started using bKash more. And because in last few years, our adoption of Visa, Mastercard, as well as the 25 banks in the system, also allowed the wealthier people to bring money from the bank to their bKash account and then engage bKash account to pay their maids or making any payment. So it's interesting from a financial inclusion point of view that we did not see a major shift in financial inclusion space during the COVID, but rather I saw the people who are already banked, them adopting bKash to interact with the poorer community. So, and I think that's fascinating because if you remain focused only on one community, then the economic development doesn't really take place because the economic activities keep circulating within that community. But if when you are connecting the richer with the poor, supply with the demand creator, okay, then the real economic development takes place and that gets further accelerated. So I would say that COVID has played a very important role, but I think that's more into the financially more affluent people. But one point I want to add that when the government wanted to reach the poorer people to give direct financial support during the crisis, okay, they used digital financial service like bKash to send the money directly, and that way the accountability of the fund and the right money going to the right person was assured. So it was a combination of many of the stories. I mean, including when the factory owners, the factories were paid salaries, and the factories received certain support from the government. Government also made sure the digital platform like bKash are used to pay the salary, and that way the government felt comfortable that the money has gone to the right people. So on one hand, there was an organic growth of the relatively economically higher group adopting digital financial service, and the poorer people with their existing arrangement got intervened through government intervention of both paying salary as well as paying giving them financial supports.
Zennon, can I? This is Ling. Hi, can I? Is it okay if I add another point to
Sure.
what Kamal said on financial inclusion? I actually think a lot of the new technologies, mobile penetration, eKYC, and then including all the services created by the fintechs, no doubt will create more financial inclusion. One thing I do want to point out is Mastercard, we believe access is not equal to usage. So it has created a lot of access to financial services for the financially excluded, including small businesses, right? Not just the individuals. But we must keep in mind access is not equal to usage. What do I mean by this? Having a bank account, let's say, doesn't mean you're included in the formal economy. Let's take a small business as an example. If I'm a small business, I have a current account with the bank, but I still cannot get lending from the bank because they view me as too risky and not profitable. But the working capital is my lifeline, right? And we all know SMEs in many economies, the drivers of innovation, they provide actually the largest percentage of employment opportunities as well. But unfortunately, this is also a group that's usually financially excluded from a capital lending perspective. And that is what I mean by usage. So I think we believe, Mastercard believes that the private enterprises and the governments must still come together to come up with solutions. Things like data, right? What's preventing a bank from lending to a small business? Well, they don't have enough data. They don't have insights into the small business behavior. Therefore, they don't know how to make a lending decision. But there are platforms with payments, in fact, and that's what Mastercard is actually driving in terms of financial inclusion. You will get some alternative data to help the traditional and non-traditional lenders to do better credit decisioning, and therefore you give more working capital or the much needed capital to the small business community. So that's just another point I want to add to what Kamal said.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Ling. I mean, when Kamal kind of pointed at this as well, is the ecosystem is really important, whether that be the consumers, the businesses, the government, or the companies that are providing the services, and then around the data side of things as well. I mean, a company like Mastercard, your ability to produce data to help companies kind of navigate this crisis, because you have visibility into a lot of those transactions and trends, is very valuable, invaluable, I would say, certainly in this space. Anthony, I want to come back to you. I mean, you talked a little bit about how Vietnam wasn't as affected. So I'm not sure how well this question fits, but what do you what are the lessons that you've learned from this? I mean, what do you wish that Momo had in place 9 months ago when this started, as opposed to today? I mean, what kind of caught you from a business perspective unaware?
Yeah, so you're right that again, with Vietnam not really having faced it as acutely, there wasn't too much that we had to rethink completely. But I did have the benefit of being in the Philippines when this really hit, and I think there were many examples of how consumers and businesses adapted, and I think that, to Kamal's earlier point with government disbursements, again, was not really required in Vietnam, but in Philippines, the traditional method was through the large public sector bank or cash outlets. But this time it shifted completely, and in fact, I think bKash was able to. And it was a choice for citizens, and bKash was the largest recipient, more than all the banks put together, right? I think that it not just government, but because that led to even elderly people downloading the app because of the incoming transfer. But to Ling Hai's point, it was not just about the money getting in or the access to an account, but we did see a lot of, because our worry was that the money would just, flow out, but it didn't. It was actually spent in app, in wallet, which was, on use cases, which was very encouraging. Of course, a portion of the money was taken out in cash as well, typically through bank transfers, though, not at outlets, because people didn't want to go up. And I think it helped that the central bank lowered or actually eliminated for some time by encouraging the banks to remove interbank transfer fees. And that had a huge impact, both in terms of just money transfer, but also cash into the wallets, which is the other impediment to usage. Even small businesses, digitally enabling QR, and to your point, we had to very quickly now enable remotely, because we were used to some form of physical interaction, but we had to in fact start a new sub-feature on the QR payments where you had to import a QR, because normally when you're getting a QR, you can't, and you're using only the mobile phone, you can't scan that QR. So you have to import it into your payment, which was a functionality that was developed in the first 2-3 weeks of the pandemic hitting. And then we saw even professionals like doctors, who typically would stay out of accepting payments electronically. Now they were willing to, because it was teleconsultation, they would start it and, accepting payments through QR, even donations, even the church, right? Because in the Philippines, again, was, it's a large religious community, but the ability to pay now had to be done electronically. So lots of changes. And I would say that even credit, right, through the platform, again, a point brought out earlier, we had to pivot a bit. We had initially, but we found that there were ways to open it up because the end use when it's a pay later kind of product. This was in the Philippines. In Vietnam, we were able to support more from credit services. So not just collections, but also disbursement. And now we have developed that credit score with the relatively high predictability, at least for products like pay later. So I think a huge set of changes on the consumer and merchant side, but also as a business, we had to quickly change certain aspects, but for the largest part, we rode the wave, and it was almost like akin to India's demonetization moment in the Philippines, right? But Vietnam, we still think that moment is ahead of us.
Yeah, No, that's really interesting. I mean, some of the points you brought up around regulation, Kamal, I want to come back to you on this before we start. We're about 5 minutes left here, but we'll look at the future in just a minute. But one last point I want to touch on before we get into that is the role of the regulators in this. I mean, you mentioned before in how the regulators in Bangladesh have helped this in terms of identity and KYC and all of this. I mean, let me put the question a different way. What do you think is missing? What do you think the regulators need to focus on as we move forward to really continue to enable this ecosystem, both from payments to all of the other products and services that can be layered on top of that? What do you think the regulators should be focused on? Maybe you can comment specifically on Bangladesh and then just in general.
So first of all, let me give a basic point first, that whether you are in the US or in Singapore or in Bangladesh, when you look at the physical currency that is most commonly available in the world today, every currency has a treasury secretary or central bank governor signature on top of it. So it's a government promissory note. Okay. So fundamentally, regulation is in the core of this business. Okay. And if we, so therefore, I don't need to repeat this thing to a forum like this. We all know how important it is for monitoring customers' fund protection, for monitoring the fund flow as well as to customer fund protection. Is absolutely an essential element. So and country like Bangladesh, where I find the good thing that has happened in last 10 years, that the regulators was engaged from the very beginning. There was the right political decision and the right political direction, that the regulator remained involved, and that allowed an environment where people felt comfortable operating and people had the trust that this kind of services are under the regulation of central bank. And the central bank remained very engaged. So that is the good news I want to identify. So going forward, I think the most important thing is remain engaged and maintaining that consistency, because otherwise, the innovations are great, but we remember 2008, pre-2008, everybody is talking about deregulation, and by the time a crisis took place, then people are saying, "Oops, we should have been more focused on regulation." So I think a lot of things have happened in last 10 years. And across the world, the digital identity has become more and more smarter. I see even country like Bangladesh right now, every day, all the customers are getting registered in bKash, are getting registered through digital KYC, as well as facial identity verification with the national database. So these kind of sophistications are already there. Okay. So I think the most important things are having a critical eye and not taking it lightly. Okay. And so because that's when the moment a crisis takes place, that's where the trust goes away and it impacts the whole industry. So I would say the work that the regulators are doing across the world, the global discipline that people set for fund flow, those things should be maintained for maintaining the credentials that we have already achieved.
It makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Lucy, let me just final point just to wrap things up here. When we look forward in the future, I mean, for Airwallex, what lessons have you learned over these past few months, and how does that affect your future strategy? I mean, beyond obviously growing and scaling appropriately, how do you think this has changed the outlook of the company going forward?
Yeah, so I think overall, I wouldn't say anything has really fundamentally changed. The majority of our business still comes from what I call, what I said before, the digital native businesses. But in saying that, I think, our goal is really to empower businesses to operate anywhere and anytime. And that means, from the infrastructure to the applications to the solutions, everything has to be run.
We do apologize that we have to interrupt this session. Thank you so much, Zennon and Kapron, for leading this discussion on payments in a low-touch economy. Well, next up, the spotlight will be on Bill Gates as he talks with Shirin Ban, now managing editor at CNBC TV 18, on what the COVID-19 response has taught us about how to scale financial financial inclusion. The challenges facing financial inclusion due to the COVID-19 pandemic are unprecedented. How do we as a community respond to ensure vulnerable households and businesses are resilient and will recover? Let's hear what Bill has to say in his fireside chat with Shireen.